Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Manifest. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we're dealing with the fact is that Vance is still alive and well, and the fact is he kept himself hidden because he knew there were people within the government, even the group that he was working with, even his agency, he knew that there would be people in that he couldn't trust because this whole conspiracy and this whole 828 thing of people looking into it and stuff like that it goes deep and high, within the confines of the government and stuff like that. So obviously I like that. He was like, yeah, he was planning on finding out what the major was. He was trying to actually find out who the major was by slowly ticking away at all of this from the background, but his plans had to get escalated because Ben is, being really good at getting nosy and looking into a lot of stuff. So he had to escalate his plan. So I think that's pretty dope. So all the while that's happening, Ben is still continuing to do what he's doing and reaching out to respective passengers. And this episode, he met a kid named TJ, a college student named TJ. TJ's situation is very sad, and I did like that Ben was able to kind of form some kinship with him over the fact it's because it turns out TJ's mom died, and she was his best friend. She felt great about things, and that made him feel great about it in the sense that she was like, oh, I want this for you, what she wanted for her son, and it's like, oh, you'll be great at this, and it filled him with kind of the confidence to feel like, oh, you felt great about your choices type of thing. And once he, like I said, that was his best friend, and basically sometime after he disappeared, she just kind of didn't have anything else to hold on to, and so she ended up overdosing on sleeping pills a month later, and it's like, damn. And like I said, Ben and because that was a big thing for Ben and Michaela when they came back finding out their mom was gone, because for them it felt like an instant, and for them it was 5.5 years or so, and so it's just kind of it's heartbreaking in the grand scheme of things. And then there's the whole situation of TJ ended up finding a body of this girl named Franny, and obviously it's okay, so his calling led him there, and it's so interesting because I'm curious because Jarrett's position in all this keeps flip-flopping, and it's kind of interesting in the sense that he's trying to help out the best way he can. Obviously he cares about Michaela deeply, but obviously Michaela's kind of iffy on how she feels about Jarrett right now, and it's kind of boxing him out. So for him it's he's literally the only cop that's not connected to this that knows about everything. But Jarrett kind of was yeah, you're willing to trust this kid, Ben? You don't really know him. He just happens to find the body. I mean, to be fair, it wouldn't be the first one of the passengers who ended up being a traitor, or at least, at the very least, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, most of the most of the passengers have been good. None have done anything evil, well, I guess, even the pilot, but his situation wasn't evil. It was just kind of, he thought there was more to this. He thought the lady he was with, knew more than she let on, or, that whole situation. So, but they're not typically evil. They're just regular people, essentially. So, but Jared, I think it's almost like he's basically taking out this whole Michaela and Zeke thing, kind of took it out on TJ, but also you could look at it as well, no, it's just him legitimately doing his job. It's as a detective, you gotta get a feel of these things. I'm yeah, certain things just kind of seem a little off in that regard. So it's okay, so of course, he's gonna look into it, and then he finds the fingerprints all over the place, which immediately my brain was well, TJ literally said that he got kicked out of his dorm room. Well, because they kicked out his stuff. It's maybe Franny moved into his dorm room, but that never came up. So I was oh, maybe that's not the case. But then we find out later on, it's oh no, it's because she had all of TJ's stuff, so that's why his fingerprints were all over her room and stuff like that, because the stuff was, his. So, that's why. So I thought that was kind of an interesting element to it. So, and Jarrett never, and I guess why would you apologize? No, I was just doing my job, so I shouldn't have to apologize. I didn't necessarily do anything wrong. It even kind of led to an interesting conflict between Ben and Michaela, because Ben was yeah, he's innocent, but Michaela's you're a little too trusting of people, and she's that's your weakness. And it's I guess it's interesting in the long run, because it's it's sad because it's technically not Ben's trusting nature that should be at question. It's actually kind of Sanvi's, which obviously we'll get to that soon enough. But Ben was kind of pushing her to be like, look into the investigation more. It's like, find evidence. You keep looking deeper, you'll find that he didn't do it. But it's like, she's like, well, the fact of the matter is, if I do look and keep investigating, I'm going to put him away so that he never sees the light of day. So you got to understand that too. But, it turns out Ben was right in the long run. I haven't gotten to it yet, but also, like, it's neat that Michaela's new partner, which that's an interesting complication, but her new partner is, I think her name is Makoni, but I think her first name is Jerry. It's the actress who played Nico in the Charmed reboot, and I was like, Nico! I'd seen some pictures. There was her and someone else had gotten added to the cast. There was at least 2 people. She was one of them. I didn't know the context. I just saw her picture and was like, I saw something on Google saying like, she got added to the cast. I didn't know under what context. So it's interesting because it's Nico. If you've never seen the Charmed reboot, which obviously I talk about a lot of times because I love the Charmed reboot, but she played a cop in that. So it's just kind of interesting. She's a detective in that, kind of in a fantasy / supernatural show, and now she's in a supernatural show, borderline maybe science fictional show, as a cop as well. So it's just interesting. The only difference is, like, as Nico, she wore glasses, on and off glasses, but so it's kind of catches me off guard a little bit not seeing her wearing glasses more often. But regardless, I'm going on a tangent. But I was like, hey. But the reason I think that element is neat is because the captain split Jared and Michaela up, which obviously it's like, the captain's like, you two being together, working together, caused a lot of problems in the past. This is my department now. I'm making sure we're going to make sure there ain't no issues, nothing that can come up to be an issue. We're going to run this department like a well-oiled machine, essentially. And because the problem is, like, Jarrett is literally the only person that knows everything about the callings and everything. So anything with her new partner, it's like, she's going to have to skate around how she knows what she knows. It's just kind of a thing of like, you have to trust me. But it did introduce some interesting things about Jerry. For the fact of the matter, she comes from a well-off family. At the very least, she claims that her mom hit it off big in, like, the stock market or something like that, which, why would she lie about that? But I'm like, I don't know. Maybe, so it seems like it's kind of like their new money. So I'm curious, is that going to cross over in any shape or form with Zeke's life? Because, Zeke comes from a well-off family. So I'm curious, is there going to be any correlation there? Maybe not, but maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But I'm curious to see what this new dynamic is going to be like for Michaela having a partner who knows nothing about it. Like I said, you're going to have to find ways to circumvent, like, how you know what you know, because there's going to be points of investigation. She's like, what? Because let's not forget, there's also the situation of callings can be very misinterpreted. That was quite a bit of that in season 1, so it's like, that could still be an issue, because, like, no one has 100% figured out the calling, so that could be a thing of, like, you go in one direction and she, your partner has hesitation about where you're going with all of this. So I don't know. I think that's kind of, interesting in the long run. But because I was curious, like, what this whole situation was going to be about. It turns out, like, the person who actually killed Franny was a security guard. Essentially, he's kind of like, I guess, like, there was complaints of him getting fired at his other job because he was kind of stalkerish and stuff like that. And I guess, like, his stalking went that step further. He ended up killing Franny. And so it turns out, like, TJ wasn't able to save Franny because she ended up dying before he got the calling, but this was for the purpose of stopping someone who could have moved on to someone else and gotten away with it. Because the whole thing is, like, he found her body because where her body was buried, it most likely would have never gotten found. It would have, even if it had, it probably would have been years and years later. So that's the lucky nature of this, but also it's kind of the silver lining, and it's kind of a bittersweet thing. It's more sweet than bittersweet, but still. Franny she basically collected stuff to kind of make, like, art collages, and one of her exhibits was basically made up of pictures and stuff of TJ and his mom. And so, because he never had anything, because all his stuff had gotten thrown out and stuff like that. So, and his mom had gotten evicted, her stuff was thrown out too. So, like, everything, he didn't even have any pictures of his mom left anymore. So this was kind of a reminder of that and being able to kind of hold on to her a little bit. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. And then what's interesting too is helping TJ actually puts Ben in a very interesting position, because he runs into someone that he had worked with named Susan. Was it Susan or Suzanne? I think one is Suzanne. But now she's going to potentially be hooking up with a job. So it's kind of like, all right, the dominoes effects of, like, okay, helping out TJ puts you right where you need it to be. Because it's also kind of like, almost like the calling kind of gave TJ a reward, kind of like, this was what you were missing, to kind of compensate. It's not going to like feel that hole from your mom being gone, but it can alleviate some of that pain. And, you know, Ben, you know, being on this, helping, you know, the passengers, put him in this position, so it feels like this is probably going to be further domino effects of like you getting a potential job here is probably going to actually help you find other passengers or put you in the pathways of other passengers. We'll see in the long run. So there's that. Another element to this episode is the fact is, like, while she was getting her DNA, like they were about to get blood drawn, you had Grace hearing a voice in her head saying, "No," I'm like, wait, what? And it's like she had a calling, and it's like, wait, but how? And it's like, that must mean that the baby is Ben's, but that means the calling is intertwined in their DNA. Because obviously we know that there's an actual, because obviously that was something that, you know, Sanvi found out last season, was like each one of the passengers has a marker in them. And Zeke has it. Anyone that disappeared, everyone has that marker in them, in their DNA. So I guess it can genetically get passed on. So her having the callings is kind of interesting, because, like, using a superhero reference, it's like Cecile when she had her abilities. Well, she still kind of has them. They're just not the same. She's more empath rather than telekinetic now. But it was kind of a similar thing, which begs the question, like, when the baby is born, is Grace going to keep that, or is the baby going to have the callings even at such a young age? I mean, we see Kyle has them, and once again, he's kind of the centerfold of all of this. But it also comes another big question that's kind of scary. It's like, but if that's the case, if the baby has a calling and everything, does that mean the baby also has the death date? Because the death date is you know, but I don't know. Because even though it's like, because the death date might be intertwined to their DNA, you know, like the marker in Ben, that particular marker, maybe it got passed on to the child, because this is the first instance of this amongst the passengers. So this is all new territory for everyone. And then, you know, it's like, you know, Grace ends up telling Olive, and it's like, oh, how do you know the baby's dad's if you didn't get the DNA test? I was like, I had my calling. It's like, oh. So now literally everyone in the family is having a calling except for me, because Grace is like, see, this means our family gets to stay together. And it's like, oh, is Olive really pissed about this whole calling thing like that? I mean, I guess it makes you feel even more like an outsider in the family. And then, like, you know, Cal has another, you know, calling, and she's like, no, let me, your big older, you know, twin sister, help you out, but he doesn't want her help. She's like, no, fine, I get it. And at first I'm like, is she just feeling like that because she's left out? But then she actually gives a good explanation for why. She's like, I'm not acting like this because I'm upset because I'm not getting a calling. That means that it's just further, like, you getting a calling too, like, it's already bad enough knowing that Dad and Cal might die if we don't do something about it. But now we don't know what your situation might be. Basically, because for her, she feels like the callings are more, you know, because I was about to say the callings are more cursed than a blessing in certain regards. So you would almost say, I was like, well, are you that jealous to have one? But it's like, no, because it means her family, for her, that's like living a normal life doesn't seem like it has a purpose. Because it's like, what's studying for the SAT? What's the point? Because by the time I graduate, all of you might be dead and I'll just be left alone. I'll be staring out at a family that's not there anymore because they're all gone. So it's like, you know, and her mom trying to make her feel better, but she's like, don't sit there and even lie to me like you understand. Like, you don't know that you don't have the death date, so don't talk like you know you're so sure of anything. Don't lie to me. So she starts going, we see her meet up with her friend, well, the girl she met early in the episode, Maxine, at that Believers meeting, and she was like, oh yeah, like, my name's Olive Stone, and it's like, I was like, Olive, don't give her your last name. And even she was like, wait, Stone, as in, she's like, yeah, I'd rather not people know. I'm like, but you don't want anyone who's a believer to know in general. Like, that's definitely going to come back to bite them in the ass some way. But didn't she say, like, the guy that's running that, isn't his name like Andres? Because I think I called him Andre. It's Andres, I think. It's the dude from last season who was kind of basically manipulating people, like people who were believers. He kind of rallied him up. I believe that's his seminar. We didn't get to see it, but I think that was him. So that's definitely going to be a complicated thing. Which is going to be interesting because, like, out of anyone amongst the believers, she has a more direct connection to those who are, you know, who get the callings and stuff like that. So she can probably see through a lot of stuff that Andre says as that's BS. It's like she probably can see more through it if like, oh, he's lying, but then it turns into an issue. You call it out. It's like, oh, how dare you call him out? It's like, it might turn into that. Like I said, I'm jumping the gun super far. Like we don't know. Like we'll just have to wait to see like what the next step and all that is. But I guess for her, she wants to find out more about this because I guess she feels like if she hangs around these other people who believe in it and everything, maybe she'll find out some answers, because I guess she feels like she's not going to get answers any other way. So there's that whole situation. Going back to Michaela, she's kind of getting grilled by her captain because it's like, oh yeah, all these anonymous tips you solve in cases. Yeah, you start noticing this pattern, and the fact is, like, it's like a defense attorney might start noticing. Well, not a defense attorney, but like the DA might start noticing. Like someone will start noticing that pattern to be like, might be like, doing some, getting your information illegal means, and you're trying to like compensate by being like, oh no, we got it from some anonymous source. But it's like going forward, it's like she's getting scrutiny more so on the side of her captain, but that might lean over to her partner too, like about like how she finds out what she finds out. And so I'm like, I'm curious to see how that. I mean, like, her process isn't going to be very conducive to her job. It's actually going to make it super complicated because there's no explaining that to her captain, because her captain's probably going like, okay, because she knows about Michaela being on a flight and everything, but obviously not everyone knows about the whole special abilities and everything. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening with that. I doubt Michaela's, because I'm sure she's not going to, because if she lets everyone know, like, for one, everyone's going to think she's crazy. That's the number one thing of like, if she let her captain know, her captain's going to think she's crazy. Literally, Jarrett thought she was crazy. So, it's the same thing. So it's like, and if word got out, literally the entire department would be like, oh, you can't be around Michaela. Michaela's crazy. That type of situation. So you're kind of screwed in that department. So she's going to have to do a little more legwork to kind of cover the bases of, rather than just kind of following the calling straight through, just following her instincts because the callings kind of point her in the right direction. She kind of has to, probably going to have to do a little bit more with certain investigations going forward if she doesn't want to get, cases thrown out because of the way she handled, and obviously her and Jarrett can't work on cases together anymore. The captain's like, I don't even want you two near each other when it comes to certain cases, any cases. So it's like I said, Jarrett, at the very least, despite their issues, like Jarrett would have her back. Like he'd probably cover certain bases that, Makoni won't know to look out for because she doesn't know, everything with the whole calling and everything. So, we'll have to see on that front, like where that all ends up going. But kind of getting back to something, kind of tying it into Sanvi's side of the things, I think it is interesting that even though Grace was told to stop, it's like, yet the calling didn't stop Sanvi from doing it. So part of me wonders, is it because maybe the callings can't warn you about other people who also get callings? Like maybe the passengers are each other's blind spots. So maybe the reason why is like, oh, we don't want your DNA in the system because this will turn up and, it lead to what it led to with the, Major. Like I said, I'll get to that soon enough, but the Major kind of finding out about stuff like that. Maybe that was the reason why the calling didn't like want her to, get her blood drawn and tested. But maybe, it's like it did this whole circumstance because, maybe Sanvi, like I said, because Sanvi's a passenger and maybe like her calling or her whole thing blocks out other, like maybe they're, like I said, maybe they're each other's blind spots to a certain extent. Maybe that's it. Or maybe this kind of in the grand scheme of things, like this is the way things need to go down. Because by Sanvi looking into this and later on, which side note, you kind of feel bad for Troy because Troy is super laying it on thick that he kind of likes Sanvi, but Sanvi's kind of like missing the point. Because she's like, no, I got to work on this by myself. He was like, oh yeah. And he was saying all this stuff. I'm like, oh, you want to get coffee or something? And she's like, what? And he's like, no, just here, rambling. And it's like, they actually like, oh, because at first I was like, oh, it's kind of suspicious you're there up in her business, but it's like, oh no, you like her and everything, you want an excuse to work together with her so that you can, it's like, oh, poor bastard. But I mean, later on she kind of recognizes, she's like, yeah, I think he was trying to ask me out, but I think it's just because Sanvi's so dedicated to her work, especially this work, that obviously a lot of that, her personal life kind of goes to the wayside, but regardless. But she ended up talking to the Major about the DNA sequence or something. Like, no, Sanvi. It's like, But then, like, the cool thing is Vance is looking into it because obviously he's following, like, the financing because he's like, oh, yeah, there's, like, a shadow, like, investigation into 828. So they're still looking into it, even though it seems like all investigations are kind of shut down. There's a secret one, you know, kind of being funded in the background. And then it's like, oh, what this shadow fund just put in looking into a DNA sequencer. And it's like, but Sanvi hasn't told anyone about it, so how do they know about her research? And it's like, yo, we piecing stuff together now. And then they're going to bring it up to Sanvi of like, who have you been talking shit? I haven't been talking to anyone but my therapist. Oh. And then it's going to be like, wait. And it's probably going to be the thing of they probably won't immediately jump to she is the major. They'll make it so it's like she works for the major. They'll probably kind of start there and then eventually we'll kind of see. Hopefully it doesn't turn into that thing of like, maybe we shouldn't trust Sanvi. It might be a thing of like, well, like I said, there was already a traitor passenger last season. So maybe they're going to start thinking like, oh, maybe there's going to be another one this season. You know, maybe they're starting to think like Sanvi is. But obviously Ben's going, you know, obviously that's a whole conversation this episode about like, oh, Ben's a little too trusting of people. To be fair, Sanvi's been on their side, you know, been through this since like the beginning. So obviously she's team OG passengers about, you know, with this whole calling situation. So obviously Ben's going to be more trusting of her, which is also interesting considering the fact is we now know that Sanvi kind of has a thing for Ben too. That's going to be an interesting element. It won't probably go anywhere, but it's just kind of interesting to kind of think about in the long run. But I think that's going to be the thing of Vance is probably going to try and get Ben to feed her some false information and see what happens or whatever. I think they'll jump on it immediately like, Sanvi, who have you been talking to? And it's going to turn into that. You know, like I said, we'll see in the long run, but that's an interesting aspect. But another avenue of this episode we have yet to really talk about is the whole Zeke situation. Him pleading guilty to everything, avoiding seeing Michaela, because he's in a very like, oh, I gotta punish myself type of situation. So, you know, for him, it's not just about what happened more recently. What happened most recently with Michaela was the tipping point. It's just everything that's happened in his life. What happened to his sister, like the pain, and like he just feels like it's a culmination of like, I've got to pay for all the mistakes I've made, you know. But once again, I still feel like it is that thing of like, even though you're not where you think you're supposed to be, I think you're ultimately where you're supposed to be. I think he's supposed to be in a maybe not. I don't know. But then, because this episode also reinstated something too, I was like, oh, are the callings taking on a new form or something like that? Because Michaela and Cal had that, but it's like, no, theirs is such a specific calling that the fact of the matter is, because obviously, you know, Grace heard her own voice repeating back to her. So it's like, no, the calling is still there, but Zeke, Michaela, and Cal are all getting that particular one, and I'm wondering why. Because the interesting thing is, like, when Michaela and Cal are there, they're the only ones there. Like, none of the other passengers are drawn back into that calling like they are. But Zeke's in his weird space. I guess because at the time he was getting drugged up, but before they were calling out to him, he could, but I guess because he kind of had almost like basically blinders and earmuffs up, because he was cutting himself off from the calling because he's pulling away from it rather than pulling towards it. I think because of that, it made the connection weaker. So what the calling is trying to get across, he's not listening. But luckily, Michaela was able to kind of reach out a little bit. So I think it's kind of breaking through. But what was interesting, they're on the plane again, and the plane's starting to burn now. And it's like, because it's like, okay, so what the whole thing was like, is that supposed to be how they die? But it's like I said, I think we might be in a weird situation. And this might be kind of, all right, follow me on this. Now, initially, I was thinking like, okay, so maybe it's showing like how they died in the sense that that basically like it's an alternate history of like if whatever hadn't intervened, they're playing with a straight up crash. But Zeke's up there, so it doesn't make any sense. My thought process is when they're stuck in their perpetual death, like how they were going to die. It happened. It's frozen in time, and then they are kind of like copied. So every passenger is a copy. The real versions of them are all in that plane, trapped in that moment 5 years ago. The others, like the copies of them, were kind of created and propelled into the future. That's where my mindset is. Like I said, because that would also explain Zeke too. Because Zeke's kind of like, in his particular situation, he was, you know, lost stuck in the cave situation, but still flung to the future. So it's almost like this is like their souls in a copied version of their body, their minds and their souls in their copied versions of their bodies, where the real bodies are stuck in that moment before death. I think that's what it is. And obviously, like, the charge on their respective copies only lasts so long before they slip back into the original bodies, and that original moment that of time that was frozen. It's kind of like the what is it called? The vanishing point from Legends of Tomorrow. This is me making kind of a cut. If you're not familiar with Legends of Tomorrow, basically it's like a point in time where time and space doesn't exist. It's a point that exists outside of time and space. And I think maybe that's what it is, that they're stuck in this perpetual moment. Their real selves are, and like these are kind of like copies. Like I said, wild thought that kind of fired in my head because of all of this. That's what I'm assuming that's supposed to mean. That because whatever it is, because the thing is, like, this isn't just about the death date. It's almost like, because Michaela and Cal are feeling this, because it's almost like whatever's happening is going to happen sooner. But that makes me think, whatever's keeping them frozen in time, either it's getting drained away, or the Major doing what she's doing might interfere with whatever's keeping them perpetuate. So, like, rather than getting that death date, their deaths are going to be moved up a lot sooner. So that's what my mindset is. Like I said, I'm just throwing it out there. Probably 100% wrong, but like I said, that's just kind of like, feeling this whole thing out, trying to figure it out. So it's going to be interesting to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.